Hey everybody, welcome to the 1910 podcast, a podcast from Central Christian Church's Young Adults Ministry. My name's Kevin, and I'm here with my good friend Noah, and we're really excited to get started here. Just want to give you guys a vision and just tell you what we're all about here. So 1910 is based on a verse that was really influential on my start here at this church and Noah and I's friendship. It's Revelation 19:10. And it says, "The testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy." In light of that, we've seen in this ministry the Lord working through it, and we want to make it accessible to both our community that's here now and also accessible to folks on a larger scale, because again, we believe the testimony of Jesus, what's happening currently in our context, is the spirit of prophecy, meaning that it has revelatory and relevant impact to people beyond just us. And so we wanted to start this podcast to make it more accessible digitally, and so that we could also unpack things more deeply and you guys get to know us. But right, before we get started into anything, like, why would you even listen to two scrubs like us? We're not scrubs, but I thought of it. I was like, we want to start this podcast, and like a dude goes like, yeah, let's start a podcast. But also like, why would people want to listen to us? Like, what's the purpose? So we just want to share with you who we are and have you guys get to know us and know that what's been going on in our worlds and how the Lord has been working in our lives individually and how that's morphed into our leadership in ministry and kind of what we're expecting out of this podcast and out of what we've been seeing out of our community and to share with all y'all. So today we're going to share our testimonies, kind of who we are, what we're doing, like where we've gone in our journey with the Lord, where we are currently in terms of like professional roles and ministry roles, and then what our goals are with 1910 and our hopes and our prayers for that. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Noah to share a little bit about himself. I've been talking a lot already, so I'm going to pass it off. So,
right.
Bro, yeah, tell us all about who you are.
Yeah, so my name's Noah Schmidt, and I am the Young Adults Minister at Central Christian Church. And Kev's been working with me for a little bit now. Kevin's also working alongside of me. He's doing assistant work, but co-shepherding at this point, and it's been awesome. And but I wasn't always here at Central. I grew up going to a church called Liberty Baptist Church. It's over on 4th Street. It's a really, really good church, really good people. I met a lot of the people that are in our ministry from Liberty. And so I grew up there. My parents raised me in a Christian household. They tried their best to teach me in the Word, try to build the family in the faith. But unfortunately, I come from a blended family. And that's just through circumstances, of course. So my mom has a son with another guy, and then my dad had 3 kids with somebody else, and then there's Patty and I from Steve and Casey. And with that, I don't know if you know, but like blended family dynamics can be a little messy sometimes. So, we would all go to church growing up, but sometimes there was things that prevented that. And with that, that's sort of just like our dynamic. And then aside from that, my family, like my immediate family, isn't really like into drugs or alcohol, but a lot of my extended family is. And my brothers later on got into that. I lost one of my brothers from fentanyl overdose back in 2019. But a lot of my family is into drugs and alcohol. So although like we grew up in like a Christian culture, Christian household, I was subjected just to a lot growing up and a lot of different dynamics. And one of the things that's sad is like as a young kid, I lost a lot of people. And with that, I was just equated with death really early. And as I was equated with death, and I also went to a church that was really gospel centric, I thought about death a lot, unfortunately. And with that, like, it was sort of like the type of church that would talk about hell a lot, and which is not bad. I mean, that's there, but with that, like, that was on my mind a lot growing up. And there was a time I remember when I was about 8 years old where I was thinking about, like, I really need to trust in Jesus. I really need to be saved because I don't want to go to hell. And that was pretty much most of my faith. And throughout that year, I started growing as a real young kid, just like understanding that it wasn't just hell, but it was also that, like, we have this eternal relationship with Jesus, and it's an amazing thing. And one of the things that was most impactful for me coming to Jesus was one of the most traumatic things that has ever happened to me. When I was 8 years old, or I think it was 7 or 8, I remember waking up one morning and sitting up in my bed, and I was looking at my Mike Wazowski clock. And that's not the traumatic part.
I love Monsters, Inc.
Yeah, but I loved it growing up and stuff. And like I remember like looking up above the doorway, and I was checking the time. I'm like rubbing my eyes. I'm sitting up on my bed, and then all of a sudden, like as I'm rubbing my eyes, like I'm not in this realm. Like I was in like a different realm. And like I don't know if you've ever watched like Stranger Things.
I have.
But
Upside
like
down.
it was like very similar to that, but like everything was on fire.
Whoa.
And people were screaming and people were crying out to God. And I was hearing this and I was experiencing this, and I'm literally sitting on my bed in a different place, and I'm having this waking vision. And I remember like putting my hands over my eyes, and I'm like, Lord Jesus, save me. Jesus, save me. Mom, Dad, save me. And I'm like yelling. And then within like 15 to 20 seconds, like I open my eyes. I'm just like, this is just a dream. This is just a dream. I open my eyes. I'm back in my room. Right. And
wow,
that led me to Jesus. I mean, if that wouldn't scare, the what out of you, I had that, experience where God let me taste that. And shortly after that, I gave my life to Jesus at like a very young age. And then as time went on, I didn't necessarily become like Billy Graham or anything like that, or become a preacher. But as I got into middle school, I started inviting friends to church and stuff like that. And I started realizing that like, what we need to do with our life is to share the gospel. And by the time I was 14, I finally decided to get baptized. So it took me a while to understand the obedience and the lordship factor of becoming a Christian. And then in high school and in middle school, like I said, I loved inviting friends to church. I started bringing like everybody from my school to church, and my high school youth pastor would drive a bus out to my house on Wednesday night, and we would bring like anywhere from 10 to like 40 kids. So it was like another youth group at my house, and it was the thing to do. Go to Noah's house on Wednesday. My mom would be cooking shepherd's pie, or like, I know, and my mom's shepherd's pie is bussin'.
I gotta try that. I love shepherd's
it's so
pie.
good.
Sorry. I'm focusing on the food parts here.
Yeah, and then Hungry Howie's, which I still love. Hungry Howie's.
That garlic crust, my goodness.
I know. Yeah, it's really good. So then we would go to church, and I remember like people would go, and like my pastor was very gospel centric, and people would be getting saved like week after week and stuff. So like there's people like Darian Conley who are a part of our ministry, who's part of that. Sarah Agee's boyfriend, Josh, he got saved and all that.
That's sick.
And many others. I know Sarah and Taylor, like they were at Bridgepoint, but like a lot of their growth came at Liberty as well, because they were going to both. So so there's like a bunch of our people in the young adults ministry now that like were a part of that ministry.
That's super cool.
So I'm doing that, and like I'm known as like the Christian kid at school, and and evangelizing to people. But meanwhile, like behind the scenes, I'm just like dealing with lust badly, and it was a silent struggle. I wasn't telling anybody.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was 16, I went to a purity conference, and I go to this purity conference at Suncoast Cathedral. And I remember hearing from the Lord that night very clearly that I was going to be a pastor. And I didn't know if I was just like guilted to the point I'm like, I'm so bad with this, like I got to become a pastor to compensate. No, I'm just kidding. No, but that night, like I remember hearing from the Lord, like in worship, like you're going to be a pastor. And that scared me. And I remember looking at my youth pastor and being like, hey, I'm going to be a pastor. And he looked at me and he sort of laughed, not like a rude way, but he was like, Noah, if you can do anything else but being in ministry, do it. He's like, if you can find happiness doing something else, do it. And what he meant by that, which sounds like horrible advice from you, the pastor, but what he meant by that was like, if you can be happy or content doing something in the normal workforce, like, that's probably a sign that you're not called to this. But if you can only find yourself doing this, that means you're called to.
I've heard that recently.
Yeah.
Like I'd heard it before. It's like, don't do ministry like unless it's the only thing you can do.
Yeah.
And I've heard a pastor talk about it. Like he was in corporate America, but he was like, instead of doing stuff for his career, he was meeting people for coffee and talking to them about Jesus and evangelizing.
Yeah.
He's like, I was pastoring while I was working a different job. And that's part of my story, and I don't want to get into my story
No,
yet.
it's
But
totally fine. Well, that's good that someone else has heard that, and that's something that other people feel.
there's already things that I can identify that's similar in my life that you're sharing already,
That's awesome.
which is more testament to the fact that the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Is it like
Amen.
what you've gone through, what you've worked through, what the Lord has purified you in and developed you in? I have similar experiences, and I can imagine people listening would too.
Yeah. And yeah, if anybody else is in ministry that's watching this, like, or feel that tug, that is pretty sound advice, I would say. Like, if you can find yourself doing something else that glorifies Jesus outside of the church, maybe you're called to show Jesus in that way. But yeah, so when I was 16, I walked away from that, and I was like, okay, like, I feel like I need to be in ministry. And just a lot of circumstances happened between that point. I dealt with like some severe like demonic oppression, which I've shared with the group about. And a lot of it really pushed me away towards wanting to be in ministry, to be honest. And I was still dealing with the purity problem, so I didn't feel like I was qualified by any means. And around the time I was 18, I got delivered from that demonic oppression. And I sort of became like more sober in my mind and my thoughts. And up to that point, I had been thinking like, I don't know if I could be a pastor, but I can definitely do something justice oriented or something creative. So I was like, I'll either be like a cop or a firefighter, because I feel like that fits me well, or be a music producer.
Three very different things.
Yeah, very different things. But there's a lot of good programs at local SPC with Mira, with the audio stuff. So I was looking into that, but shortly after the deliverance, I felt like, maybe I should be open to this. And like right when that like mindset changed, one of my middle school pastor sent me like this link to a Campus Days preview at Word of Life and Hudson, which I know you have history with Word of Life. And
I just went to camp.
Yeah, well, it's a good organization. The great camp ministry is there, but I didn't really know much about it other than I went to camp one time with the group, and he was like, yeah, it's a Bible college. You and Darian should go check it out. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I just looked at USF. Like, I was thinking maybe USF. And so we go, and we show up with the tickets at the front door, and we're like, we're here for Campus Days preview, right? And when we walk in, like, nobody's in the building. Like, it's like the lights are sort of out in the main conference area. The lights are sort of out. Somebody's like vacuuming, and then somebody's behind the desk. And I think it might have been Riley Cordero, now thinking back about it, which is crazy, is my wife's sister, if you don't know.
And who's married to the youth pastor at Central now.
Yeah. And I'm like, I'm here for Campus Previews Days. And they're like, what? Like, Campus Previews Days isn't this weekend. And I'm like, well, okay. And they're like, but let me call the admission department. So I show them my tickets. The admissions department comes down. They look at the tickets, and then they look at my phone, and they're like, where did you find this? Like how did you get this? And I don't know. It's just like, it says it's online. And they're like, since it says it's online, if you guys want to stay this weekend, you can. So guess what? I get paired with somebody who wants to be a pastor and does music ministry and had dealt with pretty much all the same similar struggles as me. And we were making beats that weekend and stuff. It was crazy. And that weekend was the weekend where it was a missions conference weekend. And the whole weekend was like, step out and do what God wants you to do. That was the messaging, right? And I was like, dang it. So I'm like, I guess I'm going to Bible college. A little side note, the day I decided to go to Bible college, I go look back at the link, and it's like corrupted URL. Like, it couldn't be found. It was crazy. So like, God got us there. I end up going there for a year. My home church calls me back. I end up becoming a young adults assistant at my other church. And there's a lot that happened in that period of time when I was there. We lost everything with a lot of things happened. I became homeless, all that kind of stuff. And I don't want to go super into that today necessarily. We'll talk about that later. But during that time, I was doing like pastoring, and I was in homelessness and in poverty. And God taught me a lot in those years of my life. And then eventually, I think it was in 2021, I felt called away from that church and just took a step of faith and was looking around at different churches doing DoorDash and stuff like that. But at that period of time, when I tried to go into the secular workforce, once again, I felt like I couldn't do anything but ministry. So in that time, I started like a little house study, and we sort of got like a house church young adult group thing going on. And I'm looking at other churches to maybe intern at. I'm putting myself out there for a lot of different churches. And I was pretty convinced I was going to end up at a church up north in Palm Harbor, like as an intern. And I was sitting and I was considering going there. But Pastor Justin asked me to go out to lunch. So I went out to lunch with Pastor Justin, and me and Justin like sort of know each other at that point. I sort of only know him from like Selah, our worship night here. From when I was going to Liberty, I'd come to Selah like on Sunday nights. But he didn't really know me that well, but he felt like God was telling him, hey, reach out to Noah, like, go out with him. And I was telling him, I was sitting in front of him, like, man, I'm really worrying about maybe going and joining this church and doing young adults ministry at it or whatever ministry. And then he just looks at me and he's like, why don't you just do it here? And he's like, it pretty much said something along the lines of like, I feel like God was calling you to our church for that reason. And that really just blew my mind. And I felt peace about it, like almost immediately. But after testing it and looking into it, it seemed like a good idea. So that was almost 3 years ago now. And we start a little small group with 6 people in the 2-story building here with in a dark room, and I preach on shame. And it was really interesting first time we ever together. And from there, the group just started, growing and growing, and eventually we are where we are today, where we have a bunch of ministries. We have our young and marrieds ministries that meet on Sunday at 10:30. We have Thursday night from 18 to 39 now. Sunday mornings we have Tuesday together with all those guys. Thank you guys for doing that. That's such a great ministry. We have Call to Create, Lucas Omar. Am I missing anything else?
Oh man,
I don't think so. This is another ministry.
This is the new one.
Yeah, but when I got here at Central, there was probably less than like 20 single young adults here. There's some married families and stuff, but now we're in the hundreds,
right? And like we're also seeing astronomical growth,
yeah,
in terms not just numerically,
yeah.
But
Sorry
in terms
if that sounded like that.
No, of course, but in terms of like we're seeing people really growing in their faith, stepping into their gifting, all these types of things.
Yeah,
and like I came in to this ministry kind of in the middle-ish. Maybe. Yeah. I don't know if middle, but
yeah, when I was sort of burnt out.
Yeah, like a year and a half ago.
Crazy story.
A year and a half ago, right?
Yeah.
Like, if I can get into my story in part. But
that's pretty much all I have.
Yeah.
And do you want to start from the beginning, or do you want to start from that point?
I'll start there, and then we'll flash
they should
back.
Hear that. That's pretty crazy.
But yeah, so in the midst of that, like major growth, like areas and kind of those needs, right? I came in July of 2023. Yes.
Wow.
July of 2023.
Dude.
I started coming to Central Young Adults. And it's like, Noah, all your stories that you were sharing, like you were born and raised here in the St. Pete area. You've been involved in this community. Like you grew up here. So this like area is ingrained in you. Like I'm an implant from New York. And so I got to St. Pete because I was starting working at a church in the area as a youth ministry assistant. And I had gotten to a spot where I was extremely burnt out there. And I had caused a lot of pain. A lot of pain had been caused and like, put on to me. And like I was at a spot where I just needed to, I felt like I was like, I'm never going to work in church ever again, ever. And in light of that, it was my very last Sunday working at that church. And I had a list of like 15 different churches I was going to look at. Because when you work in ministry, the best thing you can do is develop relationships with a bunch of people all over the place, so you can gain perspectives and friendships and just spurn each other on in the faith. And so I had like 15 churches I was going to look at, and Central was like not low key, like bottom of the barrel. And I was like, whatever.
Dang, bro.
But I go to a local coffee shop, and I see people who seem to look my age, and they're reading. They have their scriptures open on a Sunday afternoon, and there's a guy with a T-shirt on from a local young adults conference, To Live For. Shout out Austin Marshak.
You'll be on here.
So. Yes, you will be. But I had wanted to go to the conference and didn't get to. So I just walked over. I was like, hey, like, where do you guys go to church? Like, it looks like you guys are diving into the word. And they're like, oh, we go to Central. And I was like, oh, like, I'm familiar with Central. Like, I've been iffy about that. But at that point, I was asking a specific question of, like, why do you go to XYZ church and what keeps you there? Because I was disillusioned to a lot of things like preaching and production value and stuff that was just like,
what do you mean
it's
by
cool. That? Like, in terms of just like the glorification of the guy on stage, or like expensive like hype stuff, like the coolest or the hypest church in the area.
That was your measure of success?
That was what it turned into.
Okay.
It wasn't at first, but I had kind of been ingrained into that world and was kind of convinced of that.
Okay.
Until I had one of those sleepless nights, where your brain is just bing, 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 bing. One night, my thought line, excuse me, sorry guys. Well, we have Dunkin' Donuts over there. But we had one of those sleepless nights, and the thought came to my mind of like this new definition of church for me. So church initially was like, this is a place that I go and I sit and I sing songs and I listen to someone like teach me something, and then I leave.
Okay.
But in that moment of sleeplessness, the Lord was like, I've heard, and I'll talk about this in a bit too, but I've heard the Lord speak to me. It's my voice in my head, but it's things I would never say that line up with the scriptures, which is like, okay, that's not me, and
right.
It's not of the enemy, so it's got to be of the Lord. So the idea, the definition changed from church being that like you come to consume. It's church is people doing life together under the shared expectation that they'll encounter Jesus Christ.
Amen.
So it's relational, extremely relational, and then it's experiential, and it's rooted in Jesus.
Amen.
Those are the kind of the three things. And so when I would ask that question, I wasn't looking like verbatim of like, it's a place where people do life together to get to
imagine.
Right. But I was looking for things that were like that. And Lucas, who's leading our Call to Create ministry, he basically said that. He's like, I've developed relationships that are going to be lifelong. I've met people and grown in relationships that are just extremely valuable. And I've learned and understood more about the scriptures than I ever before in my life.
Amen.
I was like, I like those two things.
Praise God.
And so that was a Sunday. The next Thursday, I came to the Young Adults Ministry, and I met this guy. And I was trying to keep it a secret that I had worked in ministry before. I wanted to kind of play the background, but that's also just not who I am at all. I can never, like, I'm a loudmouth unintentionally. I like to say what I think. It's a vice and a virtue, I guess, because I feel like I have valuable things to say, but sometimes I don't know when to shut up. But
everybody loves you.
Yeah, so it kind of came out that I had worked in ministry before, and then within the next week, I was the following Wednesday, Noah and I got lunch, and he just shared his heart with me where he was at. And the basic premise of it was like, hey, I just need help. And
I was cooked, bro.
Yeah, and I don't want to go into details of where you're at in your life stage at that point, but like I
was just cooked. I don't remember.
But like I was there. I was in that place a year and a half prior, but I wasn't humble enough to be like, I need help. I was very much just push through it. If you don't push through it, like everybody's going to see you as a failure, and you're not going to get the credits that you're like deserving necessarily. Like I was very much about like my image, which came from part of my just journey with faith, and then this church I ended up working at, and like my college experience. So like to get into it from the start, like that was how I started coming to Central, and then I'll get into how I'm like back on a church staff and things like that. But it kind of started from how like the perceptions. I think that was a big part of my testimony. But yeah, so growing up, my family wasn't necessarily a family of faith. We would go to the Catholic masses like twice a year, Christmas, Easter. We would call it CEO Christians, is Catholic Christian Easter only. Creasters. I like CEO. It feels
That's
like
pretty cool.
It's cooler, but also like, do you want that to be cool? I don't know. But yeah, so we would go Christmas, Easter, and then we had some family who would go to church like any given Sunday. We would go visit them. They lived in another state, and we would travel to see them, and then we would go to church anytime we were with them. And I just remember as a kid, I was like third, fourth, fifth grade. I was like, these people are just so nice to me, and they watch these cool videos and children's church, you know. And so we got home from one of those vacations, and I went to my mom. I was like, hey, like we should find a church like similar to those. And there weren't many. Where I'm from, upstate New York, and so a ton of those.
There's not a lot of churches.
There weren't a lot of churches.
Yeah.
So when I was a younger kid, early 2000s, there was a lot of Catholic churches. Like Catholicism was like the number one, but the city I grew up in, Albany, was at that time like the most. It's called post-Christian nation in the U.S. Where it's like they know about Jesus, they know about Christianity, but they just don't really care.
So like a lot like what we're seeing in like European countries.
Yeah, okay. For sure. So because of that though, around 2008, 9, 10, there's just church plants like crazy. Like all these non-denominational, big name, nationwide churches. Like if you're familiar with Life Church in Craig Rochelle, they launched a campus up there. Cool. Just a whole bunch of like, and they're all just like appearing. Like they weren't there before, and like the church I ended up going to, it was an old Saab dealership that just got taken over.
Oh wow!
They revamped a car dealership, a car sales place, and turned it into a church. Like they still had, I think they still do. We have to verify it, but Grace Fellowship Half Moon in New York, if it still has the bricks laid out on the ground at the entrance, it has Saab in the bricks on the ground. But yeah, like bro, my sister got married there 2 years ago. Almost 3 years ago now. Holy crap.
Crazy. She got married at a car dealership.
Well, at Grace Fellowship, that used to be a Saab dealership. But yeah, so like it was interesting, the timing of it, because it was like I've never seen a church like this in my hometown. Mm-hmm. So then I eventually was like, hey, we should find something. Okay. And eventually, like it was like we had a bunch of different options like immediately. We went to a couple of different places and we landed on this place, Grace Fellowship Half Moon. Shout out Grace Fellowship. Yeah, it was awesome. I just got connected immediately with the kids ministry, and like my parents and my older sister, they weren't really super invested, but because I'm a 10-year-old kid, you can't just leave him somewhere. Right. And so my parents would sit in the church services, and my sister as well, and it would just kind of go in one ear and out the other for a little while. But eventually, like their lives were slowly and steadily starting to be transformed. And then flash forward about 2 years, we have a new youth pastor comes into town. First youth pastor I've ever encountered who went to seminary, who actually has like a master's. That's crazy, bro. For youth ministry. And this guy, man.
Let's see, that's a challenge for everybody. Like, call up your youth pastor or ask your youth pastor at your church if they went to seminary. Let's see what the consensus is.
Yeah. But like, right. Chad was locked in, and his wife Nikki. Chad and Nikki, we love you guys so much. Yeah. But it was only like 2 or 3 months into their time at our church that there was a local tragedy where a drunk driver hit a car with 4 high school students. Oh man. Three of them went to the school that me and my sister went to, and one of them went to another. 2 of them passed, 2 of them survived, and my sister knew one of the deceased. And it just she went into kind of a deep dive, and it could have gone one way or the other. But prior to that, Chad and Nikki had been very intentional. Like, I was obsessed. I loved going to the church. I loved the youth group. But it was also like, it's because it's fun, and it's because like there's a bunch of people my age and do. Yeah. But then, like, for my sister, she was a couple years older, and it was at that point where she was kind of starting to grasp it a little bit more, and she saw this tragedy happen. She's like, I gotta start taking stuff a bit more seriously. Mm-hmm. And a couple weeks later, they went to winter camp, and like they had studied the book of 1 John, and she came back, and within the next 2 weeks she read 1 John over and over and over again, so many times that she ripped it out of her Bible that she had like never opened before. Before that weekend,
she ripped it out of her Bible.
She read it so many times that the pages got so frail.
I was about to say, I thought she like took it out. And this is all I want.
No. She wanted the whole thing, but she wanted this part in particular in this time. But like she read it so much that the pages just fell out. Dang. And I had been like the member of the family that was like, well, I started going to church, but I was just kind of like, I just go to church. I just go to youth group. And then her faith is like, this is real. And so getting to see that was super interesting. And then from that point, my parents saw that the two of us were kind of spurning each other on, and they came to faith in Christ in time, and we were both just heavily invested in the youth ministry and growing. And but in the midst of that early middle school, I started to struggle with a lust situation, and it had been ongoing for a long while. And right, like trying to do that of like, I'm in youth group, I'm in church, but I'm also struggling with this thing, and how do I navigate the two?
I feel like, not to cut you off, but I feel like that's like the commonality with like every young man. I feel like that might be a good podcast episode down the road. There's, I mean, it's almost, I think every dude I've talked to, like who I've heard their testimony, every dude, that's something they struggle with. Wait, actually I can think of one, but that's insane, right? Like, yeah. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. And that was a major part of my testimony there too,
so
because
sad.
Like that was a point for my major elements of growth. So like getting to know Jesus, but also struggling at the same point.
Yeah.
And there came a point in my life where I was just like, I'm like, publicly I'm a Christian, but behind closed doors I'm not really who I say I am. And there was a moment where I was going to be a part of a leadership, like student leadership team, and Chad, my youth pastor, pulled me aside. He's like, "You're not in a spot to do this."
Dang.
And I thought it was like, I thought I had it in the bag, like I was the popular kid at the youth group, all this stuff. But he says to me, it's like, you're holding on to two ropes and they're pulling you either direction. He's like, you want your faith in Jesus, you like desire this, but you also desire this comfort.
Dang.
That like of this struggle. You desire something like that's not of the Lord, and either you're going to hold on to both and get ripped apart, or you're going to pick one.
Dang.
Pick your faith in the Lord, or pick your faith, or pick your
reliance
on this. Yeah. And initially I was like, in the moment I was like, I want Jesus more. But based on my actions within the next couple of months, it proved that I was still just holding on to both. And over a summer, it was between my freshman and sophomore year of high school, I was found out in my struggle, and I was caught in some behaviors and was punished where I lost everything. I was like, it was taken away, like my phone, all technology, all anything. All I could rely on that summer was scripture.
Shout out your parents, bro.
Yeah.
That's good.
Thank you, Mom and Dad, for discipline.
Yes.
But right, so it was wild. We went to a county fair, and I got one of those little New Testament Bible things.
The Gideon boys?
As a joke.
Let's go.
And then, no lie, like that is the most I've read through scripture ever.
Wait, is that the one that I found with the duct tape on it?
Yes, it's a little, I have it in my backpack, but it's too far away.
Why do you have duct tape on it?
Because the cover is corny. It was like an orange school locker, and I'm like, this is ugly.
Duct tape?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I didn't have anything else, and I think at that point,
that's all I had
bro.
left.
But at that point, like duct tape wallets and all that stuff was
true.
cool. Like people would wear duct tape suits to prom and stuff. Like
my parents only left me with duct tape and a Gideon Bible.
They locked me in the basement for 6 months. No, I'm joking. That didn't happen. But it was the first time I really like opened the Word, and my faith really actually became my own, where I wasn't just getting teaching from youth group or church in the morning or kids church, but I was really engaging with Jesus for the first time. And it wasn't like a magical overnight fix, but it definitely was a catalyst for my sophomore through senior year to really be reliant on the Lord more heavily. And
then how did you get into ministry?
So because of that, like in that season, Chad, my youth pastor, was also my mentor. And I had known basically from the jump, like 8th or 9th grade, I was like, I want to be a youth pastor. Like, I want to do this. And I was like, all through those 3 last years of high school, I was like, I want to be a youth pastor. And I was looking at colleges and schools, and I went to a 4-year Christian school, and I was like, I'm going to go and get a youth ministry degree. And my dad's like, no. I was like, why? He's like, if ministry doesn't work, same deal of like, if ministry isn't a space, like you will need something to fall on. He's like, I feel like that is something for you, but I want you to also be safe. And that's a great thing. I like security and safety, and it's awesome. So I got a degree in public relations from a 4-year Christian liberal arts school. And But I also, at the end of it, did a religious studies minor, because for the first 2 years of my college experience, I was convinced, like, fine, I'll just be a PR guy. I'll write proofs and things for different companies and keep up images and whatnot. I like to write and communicate. But through that, it was my junior year of college. I was an RA, and I had noticed at this university, you get a pocket of different kids. You get kids who their parents had them go to Christian private high school.
Yep.
And forced them also to go to private Christian college, and they want nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
You will have those kids who went to Christian schools and love Jesus and like still want to love Jesus.
Right.
My story, public school, all growing up. And so it was like I was one of 5 kids in my high school. I graduated with like 700, but I graduated like with maybe 5 other kids who are Christians.
Oh, really?
Like that's it.
I would say probably it was like 1 or 2 at my school, like actual Christians.
Yeah, right. But from that point, like I was like, okay. And so then I moved into this private Christian school experience, and I was like, I don't know about all this.
Yeah.
That was the start, I think, of some disillusionment that I was kind of trying to push away, where it was very much like it was a great college experience, but like you're competing to be the best Christian, you're competing for a spouse when it comes to Christian colleges or schools. Like people are trying to get married quick.
It's just a lot of distraction.
Yeah. So it's like best Christian, marriage, like you're vying for a job, you're vying for grades, you're vying for a social position, whatever. And so I found myself just in this deep like pit of comparison. Mm-hmm. But it was like a slow fade, and I was like kind of losing myself still. And then COVID hit in the middle of my college experience.
Dang.
And like it was cool. I ended up volunteering I was an intern at a youth ministry. So youth ministry was always a thing. From the time I was 6th grade, I only had 2 months off of youth ministry. Dang. By the time COVID hit. Dang. And the 2 months were because like the youth ministry I was volunteering with lost budgeting, and they had to cancel the program. But yeah, like 2 weeks into going to college, I found a youth group to volunteer with. And then when COVID hit, I started volunteering. I was an intern informally with Life Church, that campus that popped up in my hometown. Wow. And it's just youth ministry. And then I kept feeling that push of like, I want to be a leader in these kids' lives so that when they come to college, they do desire a relationship with Jesus. Because I had some guys, I was RAing for freshman kids who had just come out of high school, and I was like, some of these kids really actually just don't have a relationship with Jesus. They say they do, but they don't. Like, I want to be someone who's influential in their lives for the Lord, so that they come into these spaces and they know what their faith is, and they know how to carry themselves, and they're not just a bunch of punks.
Yeah, no, that's real.
And that wasn't everybody, but it was definitely a situation where I was like, oh shoot, like, who is your youth pastor?
Well, I think you learned that heart from Chad.
Yeah.
Yeah, like,
100%.
Yeah.
And so
that's a shepherd's heart.
Yeah, for sure. And COVID hits, and I'm back home, and then I go back to school, and it's just a nightmare. Like, all the things that I value and prioritize are just not prioritized anymore. Yeah. And so immediately I was like, how do I get out of this place? Mm-hmm. And there's some circumstances that led to that I won't get into at this point, but there was definitely a spot where I was like, I just can't be here anymore. And I was just looking for jobs, putting myself on LinkedIn, all that stuff. So
you're college dropout?
No, I finished.
Oh, okay.
Because the beauty of COVID, the one good thing about COVID
is you can go online.
Is that, right. Hey. So so the semester started in August. By October, I had an opportunity. Chad, who was my youth pastor in New York, started youth pastoring at a local church in St. Pete. And he reached out to me. He's like, hey, I have an opportunity for an assistant position. And dude, my first interview, I bombed. I didn't realize it was like an important interview. And so I wasn't prepared. I was like, oh, it's just me and Chad kicking it. And he texts me after. He's like, dude, like, even me, like, I wouldn't want to move forward with you at all.
Yo.
I was like, whoa. And then he reaches out to me another 2 weeks later. He's like, hey, all the other candidates like fell through. Would you want to potentially hop back in?
Bro, it sort of sounds like our interview.
Me and you?
Yeah, not that you bombed, but what do you do?
I said no to you at first. I'll get there. But yeah, so I bombed the first one, and then the second one I go through, and it's these Zoom interviews, and I'm in New York on Christmas break. And it's like, yeah, like and they like interviews started in November. I got a, hey, we'd love to have you in December. And I was like, I could start working there in January because I can do my final semester of college online. So I was doing school online and working in youth ministry at the church. And it was awesome. It was a super cool experience, and it was fantastic. My co-lead Bailey is a rock star. She was fantastic to work with, and the students and the families were phenomenal.
Is she married to one of your
Zach.
friends?
Zach Lai. Bailey and Zach Lai. Love
Shout
you
out
guys.
them.
Yes.
When I visited a couple times, Bridgepoint, those two were the ones that went out of the way to be intentional with me. And that left like a lasting impact on
They're
me.
amazing. Yes. Love Bailey and Zach. They're fantastic.
Yeah.
And so I got to work super closely with Bailey, and then Zach helped us with creative stuff, and like he taught me pickleball, bro. Like this guy. But yeah, I got connected there with was working in youth, was involved with the young adults just as an attender, and in time there were just things that I was like Chad had mentioned when he started working there before I was working there, that there was some stuff that was kind of like iffy that he had thought about.
Like
and
a philosophy difference.
Yeah, different philosophies. I know he has some ideas and other people have ideas, but like for me, I was like, hey, I'm fresh set of eyes. Let's figure it out. But over time, there was just things I didn't fully agree with, and I won't get into it, but there were things I didn't fully agree with. There were points where like I felt like a little bit less than, and it breeded in me this insecurity. And I think because of that, it impacted a lot of different areas. And I moved into a dating relationship in that time, and the insecurities about the job and the other elements of life kind of weeded its way into that relationship. And over the course of a couple of months, I was extremely controlling and toxic towards this person because I felt like that's just what I needed. I needed to keep the appearance of like, oh, this relationship is fine, and I needed like this, that, the other thing. I needed to keep this appearance of like, this job is fine,
like this
and I'm doing okay.
all around in your life.
Yeah.
Like you had to provide some sort of version.
Yeah.
That wasn't necessarily being transparent to who you truly were.
But then also like I had these ideas in my head of like what life is supposed to look like, what a job in church is supposed to look, what a dating relationship is supposed to look like.
I feel like a lot of young adults struggle with
and
that. Yeah.
All of the preconceived notions I had, all the thoughts of like, this is how it's supposed to be, weren't happening. So I was getting progressively more angry, more bitter, and like things just steadily started to fall apart.
Dang.
Right. Like the relationship was ended by the person I was with. And then I experienced my first hurricane that same month.
Real.
Then the next month I had gotten a diagnosis of hypertension 2, which is like the most intense high blood pressure you can have.
Dang.
I was 23
Dang,
with hypertension 2, which is like insane.
That goes along with, watching Jeopardy every night.
I'm an old man. I read books. I watch Jeopardy.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to make fun.
No, you're chill. No, you need it. You need to humble me. But yeah, so then from there, like, right, the hypertension 2, and then the turn of the year in January of 2023, I learned some things about myself from my childhood that I wasn't familiar with. And then the church made a decision to hire someone without really communicating with the direct student ministry staff team, and I was super bitter and super angry. But I had a couple months to just sit with it and to be like, hey, like I haven't been as healthy as I could be. There's elements of this church that aren't as healthy as they could be, and made the decision in pain, but also like knowing like I need to step away.
Yeah.
And like the new student pastor there, from what I understand, is fantastic. I encouraged the team to bring in a guy who was interning with us for a while, Sean. He's also fantastic. So like just I was in a spot where it was started as bitterness, and then it morphed into realizing like this is a place where I can't be anymore.
And then that's when shortly after that, we intercepted you.
Yeah. So then that was May-ish of 2023. And then I ran into these guys at a coffee shop in June of 2023.
Okay. And then, let me ask you. So you served in youth ministry here for a while. You've been doing that up till very recently, until you became part-time with us.
Yeah.
Sort of maybe in like not a couple words, in a little bit, to share how you sort of got involved to where like you're at right now with YA.
Yeah.
Because I'd like for them to know.
Yeah, for sure. So, right, I met those guys. I started coming with Noah, and then, right, we grabbed lunch, and he tells me, hey, I need help. And it's a Wednesday, and he's like, can you teach at the Young Adults Ministry tomorrow?
Tomorrow,
And I was like, what? No,
my
what?
bad, bro, my bad.
But I was like, because I want to play the background. I don't want to jump into things too early, but I was like, but this is someone who needs help.
That might happen if you
where like ministry. Right, where I thought my world was falling apart and I needed to keep composure.
Right.
When I saw Noah be vulnerable with me, I was like, dang, I wish I was that humble to call on somebody and to know like, hey, like it's okay if there's someone who's like healthier than me to handle this right now. And so that like in that moment you showed me a better side of what I could have been. Like I could have handled my insecurities in a healthier way, and right, like, but that was the thing, like testimony of Jesus being the spirit of prophecy, you sharing where you were at in your relationship with the Lord, and then like me being able to say, hey, like I'm in this spot where I'm ready and willing to help, and then
I appreciate that
because of those first couple of weeks, like you would call on me every once in a while, like, hey, like I'm not in a good spot right now. Can you take on this?
It's gotten healthier though.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
and now
I don't only call on him when I'm unhealthy, but that's where I was.
Yeah, at that point.
Help.
But then it turned into like, hey, let's make this a rhythm so that there's health all around.
Yeah.
And right. So then I started attending here regularly, and then I would help out Noah in places that he needed to be helped out at, and I got plugged in. Being mentored by Justin, who encouraged you to come to Central, and he was slowly inside like, are you sure you'll never work in church
ministry again?
And I was like, no, never. I was working at a luxury condo, which was what it was. I have one more week there as of recording day.
Amen.
And but eventually it came to a point where Noah had reached out to a few folks to say, hey, like I need an assistant to help out with the young adults ministry. And initially I was like, heck yeah. And then he mentioned some other people who like would have been great candidates, and my brain immediately went like, yeah, they're good, but like I'm better than them in XYZ this way. No, and like full disclosure, like, and I know the folks who were asked like are probably listening or watching. Like I had a moment where I was like, yeah, you guys are good, but like I'm better than you. Just in that moment. And then
I appreciate you
I drove home from that conversation, and the Lord very clearly was like, your ego just came out so heavy.
Dang.
Like, no, this is not for you right now. You are not in a place to take this position. No. So I text Noah the next morning. I was like, hey, bro, I can't do this.
Lord, and from my point of view,
the Lord very clearly told me no.
My point of view, bro, that was so confusing to me.
Really?
Because in the meeting, you're like, oh, this is awesome. Like, you know, we're looking at things. Like, we have a similar ministry philosophy, if not the same, in a lot of ways. And you're like, oh, I can't wait to see where this would go. Like, thank you for considering me. And I'm like, and in my mind, there was another person who was pretty interested at that point. I'm like, man, this is going to be a really hard decision. And I'm like, Lord, what do I do? And then like the next morning, you're like, actually, I don't know if I could do this. Yeah, I don't know.
No, exactly I told him, like, the Lord very clearly told me no because of my ego, which was a problem at my previous position.
Yeah.
And then 2 months, maybe 3, like the Lord is really working and churning in my heart and my thought life, and like breaking that down.
And on the other side of things, on my side too, it was like things for both of those individuals, like just was confirmed to them individually. Like that's not what the Lord wanted them to do, and it didn't happen immediately for those two. It was like within that 3 months, and
the Lord's crazy.
It was wild because it's like, and like I don't think I was necessarily ready to like take on somebody with me at that point either. So it just like worked perfectly, and then. That's the cool. Timing was you reaching back out to me, right?
Yeah. It was mid-November, I think, somewhere around there. But I was I was leading. We do communion every week in our Sunday mornings, and I was leading a quick just like meditation on what the meaning of communion is, and then was also doing our Revelation Bible study, and was just like in the thick of like teaching and theology and just like my
You
brain.
mean prophecy? You said we were doing communion on Thursday night.
No, Sunday morning.
Sunday
Did I say
morning,
did I say
I don't
Thursday
know,
night?
bro. I think
I
I
meant
might have
Sunday
zoned out.
morning. But Sunday mornings we do communion, and then we do a study, verse by verse study, and
Yeah.
we were talking about Revelation, and like I had just kind of sparked of like, I love to do this. And so I like sat with it. I was like, maybe I reach back out to Noah. And then later that night, my family all in New York was like, oh, we watched your live stream of your teaching. And my grandmother, my mom's mom, she knows who God is, but isn't really like a believer. Like it's not really, it's like, I know God or know about God, but I don't really know the Lord. She said like, that's something he's supposed to be doing.
Dang.
And to hear that from somebody who
doesn't follow Jesus.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, oh shoot. So shout out to Grandma Smith.
Let's
for,
go.
And I it's cool. I got to tell her over Thanksgiving, like, hey, like you are a major reason why I stepped back into this world.
Dang.
But yeah, from August of 2023 up until November 2024, I was telling myself I'll never, ever, ever work in ministry ever again. And here we are.
Yeah. And I just want to speak to like the arrogance, the pride, and the ego side of thing. Like, I think what I've seen is like in everything that I've had to confront you about or even speak into, you're never like, you don't bash at it. You take it humbly. And there's some challenging things that I've asked you to do or change. And I just want to like give you honor in front of everybody that like he's locked in, like, and he's mindful of that. And I think that's something I struggle with as well, is ego, pride. And shout out, JR, the person who had me intern under him for almost 3 years.
Mm.
Like, I was full of myself, bro.
Mm.
And I think that like that just happens really easily with the teaching position sometimes, or people looking to you for advice and stuff like that. Like, it's weird that ministry can sort of breed an ego in us. And I'm just proud of you, bro. I think you've really crucified a lot of that in your life. And when you're in that, you're transparent about it. And I think your transparency breeds freedom, right? Just like 1910, the testimony of Jesus is a spirit of prophecy. Yeah. And that's sort of what I want to do in these podcasts, is like, I want to be transparent with other people about where I've struggled or where I've been, or where you've struggled or where you've been, is be like, hey, like, I'm walking alongside of you in this, and like, we're growing together in Jesus. And I think that's something that we've done in our ministry well. It's like, I don't try to pretend to be somebody I'm not. Like what you got was like, I was just cooked, and I was like, hey, like, I'm not healthy right now. I really need tomorrow. Like, you really need.
And then my part of that was like, dang, like, I admire you for sharing that, because where I was, I would have never, with somebody I just met, would have never pulled them aside and be like, I need help. And so I'm thankful for you for that vulnerability, and like, that's something you've taught me.
Thank you, bro. And I think part of that too, like, this is something I've talked with a lot of the guys about. It's like, as I've shared those things, it's like, you're not healthy right now. Like, you should rest, Noah. Like, and that's been great. So this whole transparency thing, like, really is the way that the church designs. And I'm always talking about James 5, but James 5:16, if you confess your sins to one another and pray for one another,
you'll be healed.
You may be healed.
Yes, sir.
Right. And healing, or revealing, comes healing. And I feel like I've healed so much, especially in ministry, as I've stopped trying to be somebody I'm not. And I've seen that with you too,
dude,
bro.
Yeah. That was a big struggle that I had there. But
so, all right. So, Kev, I want you to tell us a little bit about sort of what we're doing, our current status in the ministry.
Yeah.
Right
So
now.
that's where we just shared where the two of us are at.
Yeah, that's where
But like, so right, we both lead within Central Young Adults Ministry at Central Christian Church, and we're in this spot now in terms of teaching, where Sunday mornings we meet, and then Thursday evenings we meet. And on Sunday mornings we're doing a verse by verse study through Revelation, and that's been extremely like eye-opening, crazy, challenging, learning a ton, growing a ton. I for a lot of folks, it's their first time opening up the book of Revelation. And then also on Thursdays, we're doing a deep dive study through the spiritual gifts. We just got through the First Corinthians list, and we started with service. We started with service in the Romans list, and we'll be talking about that in our next episode here. But because of these things that like opening them up with teaching, but it's also very discussion based, and like we give a lot of like practicals and encourage people to step into these things and respond almost immediately. There's a lot of spiritual warfare going on. We won't get into details at this point, but
I'm sure we'll talk
like,
about it.
I'm experiencing it. Noah's experiencing it. Like, people in our community are experiencing. The enemy doesn't really enjoy what we're doing, so he's coming at us.
Yeah, like teaching Revelation and then doing a deep dive, like what you joined in on was like a deep dive on prophecy, like the gift of prophecy, and then Revelation.
Yeah.
And then, I really feel like right now, like a lot of the young adults are super involved in leadership positions in the church. So I just feel like, I think there's 7 young adults involved, and maybe more on staff now. And it's just like, we're getting attacked, and it's like there's a real enemy who does not want us to serve the Lord in this way. Right. And yeah, bro, I think with the spiritual warfare piece, like one thing I thought was pretty funny. It's not funny, but it was like, I was like, bro, did you expect it to be at this level? I remember having sort of a conversation with you about that pretty recently, where like he's going to teach on like a Thursday night, and he's like getting hit with headaches.
I had 2 weeks ago, I had a migraine all day.
All day, yeah. Or like, just the enemy's trying to do everything to emotionally like wreck us or physically wreck us with sickness. And I just think it's really nice to have somebody suffering with me, bro. Like,
okay, cool.
Thanks for being a part of it.
But then right, and like we can ping that off of each other. It's like,
this is weird.
Am I just not taking care of myself, or like, are these demons?
Yeah. What's going on? Right. Yeah.
But yeah, so that's where we're at in our context, and we just want to share that with you guys because, again, like we mentioned at the front end, the Lord's been working through our ministry, and we believe that the testimony of Jesus is a spirit of prophecy. So how he's working here could potentially have impact on some of y'all who are in maybe other spaces from here. But we believe that what we have going on is worth sharing, and so we wanted to create this space, this podcast, 1910, and share it with you.
We love that. So if you are not connected with us, you're not connected with our ministry already, we want to encourage you to connect. There's a lot of ways to. You can email us if you have any questions. We'll even have the notes for all the upcoming podcasts. And then also you have us on socials or whatever way you want to get involved. We encourage you, if you're not in a local church, get into a local church. Yes. It's really important to have discipleship. If you're local and you're looking to get involved with the YA ministry, there's a lot of ways to get involved. And if you're not in the young adult age, we have literally, things for every single person of every age at this church. It's Central Christian Church in St. Petersburg, Florida. That's where we're doing this ministry out of. And our young adults group is Central Young Adults. So it's awesome. We'd love to get connected with you. And that's pretty much all we have for today. So have a good day.
See y'all next time.
Later.